Hey friends, Elizabeth here from Plant-Based Bride, back again with another video. And today I'm going to share with you all the books I read in May, my thoughts and feelings about them, my stats for reading in May, and then chat a tiny bit at the end about my plans for reading in June. So without further ado, let's get into my reading stats for May. If you're not interested in stats and you want to skip them, or if you're just looking for my feelings about a particular book, feel free to use the chapters down below. You can scrub along the timeline or check out the description box and click around and watch whatever you like. So I'll pop my stats up on the screen now. I read 11 books in May for a total of 3,070 pages. The longest book I read was The Infinity Quartz, and the shortest book I read was The Lottery, and I had no DNFs this month. So I do have many books that I am in the midst of completing, but they're not technically DNFs because I do plan on finishing them eventually. As for the age demographic of the books I read in May, 54.5% were adult, 27.3% were YA, and 18.2% were middle grade. As for genre, I read the most in romance and fantasy. Next was contemporary. And then in third place, historical fiction, horror, and science fiction. As far as the format, unsurprisingly, because I am in the midst of packing up my entire life to move across the country, 72.7% of the books I read this month were in audiobook form, and 27.3% were ebooks. As for my star ratings this month, it was kind of a weird one. So I had 7 5-star reads, which is potentially the most I've ever had in a single month. I guess I'd have to go back and double check, but that seems like a lot. I had 0 4-star reads, and then I had 1 3-star, 2 2-stars, and 1 1-star, which is very strange. So yeah. As for the LGBTQIA+ rep in the books I read in May, 72.7% of the books I read did not have any LGBTQIA+ rep, and 27.3% did have rep in some form. For the year published, 2 books were published in 2021, 3 books in 2020, 3 books in 2019, and then 1 in 2015, 1 in 2011, and 1 from 1960. I like to include information about where I'm getting my books from. I mostly just really like to look at this for myself to be able to analyze how much I'm utilizing different services that I am a member of. So this month, 63.6% of the books I read came from Scribd, 18.2% from the library, and then 9.1% from NetGalley and 9.1% Audible. As for authors' identity, white authors and Southeast Asian authors with 33.3% each. Next was Southwest Asian authors with 16.7%. And then East Asian and Black authors were tied with 8.3%. As far as authors' gender, 90.9% were female authors, and then 9.1% were books written by multiple authors who are not all of the same gender. And our last stat for the month, authors' nationality. In May, I read 7 books from American authors, 1 book from a Canadian author, 1 by a German author, 1 by an Indian author, and 1 by a Vietnamese author. So those are all my May stats. As always, I find it really interesting to look at my stats at the end of the month and see where I'm meeting the goals I've set for myself and where I'm falling behind, and then also just generally to look at the trends in what I'm reading. Oh, another thing I forgot to include in my stats was that I have now read 60 out of my 125 book goal for 2021, which means I've read 48% of my goal, and I'm 9 books ahead of schedule, which is probably going to come in handy next month because I'm moving and will probably not read very much. But we'll see. Okay, so now let's go through all the books I finished in May and let me give you my thoughts. So the first book I read in May was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And The Lottery is a horror novella that was published in 1960 and is generally considered a classic of the horror genre. I first heard about the short story years ago, but I had never taken the time to pick it up. So last month, actually, I requested it from my library and it became available right at the start of this month. And it's 30 pages, so I read it in a single sitting and it was fantastic. I feel like this is a hard novella to talk about without spoiling it because it is is so short, but I will say if you are a fan of horror or dystopia or social commentary, think something like Handmaid's Tale, a dystopian version of our society where morals have been skewed. I think you'll really enjoy this. Even though it's so short, it has a steady yet gradual building of tension and eeriness that goes from something that feels very commonplace, day to day, and generally jovial in tone, and it turns into this absolutely horrifying, stark, disturbing conclusion. And it does it in 30 pages. It is so well paced. It is absolutely a masterclass in only including what needs to be included to tell the most pointed and impactful story. It still manages to have developed characters. It still has emotional impact. It is really good, so I would highly recommend. The next book I finished in May was Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga. And Other Words for Home is the story of a young girl named Judah who is immigrating to the US with her mother from Syria. And when she gets there, she comes face to face with xenophobia, bullying, racism, Islamophobia, and the adjustment inherent in being an immigrant, in transplanting your life from one culture to another very different culture, and how the struggles don't just involve your own adjustment to a new place and to leaving behind your home and potentially friends and family who you care for, but also adjusting to people who are unwilling to adjust to you and your presence and your difference. And I just felt that this book was so beautifully done. I adored Judah. I thought she was such a compassionate and complex and brave young girl. I loved how fully herself she was and how unabashed she was of the things that she loved, of the things she wanted to do and who she wanted to be. I loved that she stood firmly in her own identity and her values while she struggled, as I think any child does, especially children who have gone through that kind of huge life shift. She still maintains this unflappable hope and genuine kindness and openness to life. And I just really loved following her story. I felt that this was so beautifully done, so beautifully told, and it's exploring the really important issues of Islamophobia, racism, and xenophobia for immigrants and how immigrants are treated when they come to Western countries. Children can be so cruel, but so much of that cruelty is passed down from their parents. So I think a story like this, while it is aimed for a middle grade audience, and I think it can have a lot of influence in a positive way for those audiences, for young readers, I also think that it can change the minds of adults who may be less than tolerant of immigrants. I think that perhaps reading from the perspective of a young girl might trigger the compassion for some adults who have maybe struggled to find compassion for adult immigrants in their life, which is sad to say because it would be nice if all people were able to extend compassion to all other people, no matter where they were born, but sadly that is not the world we live in. So I would highly recommend this book. I think it is really a valuable read for people of all ages. The next book I finished in May was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal, El-Mohtar, and Max Gladstone. This is a sci-fi novella with a sapphic romance at the center, where our two protagonists, Red and Blue, have an entire love story through letters, while fighting on opposite sides of a war on a global scale that is traveling through time. So if that sounds cool to you, you should read this because this book is awesome. I loved This Is How You Lose the Time War. I thought it was so unique and clever. At first, I felt a little disconnected from it with the style of the letters written back and forth, but very quickly I became very attached to both Red and Blue. I loved being able to tell who was writing based on their different style, which is also thanks in part to the fact that the two authors took one character each, so they actually were written by different people. I thought it was funny, immersive, heartbreaking, and heartwarming. I loved the romance between the two protagonists. It is a sapphic romance. I thought it was very beautifully done. And I've seen that some people didn't love how this book handled the world building, but I will say that while I am a stickler for world building, and especially in sci-fi and fantasy, I want all the world building, throw it at me. I want to be able to envision every single thing in the world. I really enjoyed how in this story, the world building came together very slowly very like pieces of a puzzle. It was so gradual, and it had that kind of feel where maybe for the first half, they seem like a random jumble of pieces and they don't make any sort of complete picture. But by the time you've come to the end and inserted that last puzzle piece, the entire image is revealed, and you have such a holistic perspective on the image. You can see everything from a bird's eye view, and it is complete. And that's how I felt about the world building in this book, and I really loved it. So I would highly recommend. I'm definitely going to read this again. It is super timey-wimey. So for my fellow Doctor Who nerds, I think you're going to love this one. And I would definitely recommend. The next book I finished in May was The Cost of Knowing by Brittney Morris. And this was an ebook that I was given access to as an e-arc from NetGalley. And at the beginning of the book, Alex, who is the older brother, has this vision of his younger brother Isaiah's tombstone. And he has this intense fear that his brother is going to die like his parents, and he feels this intense guilt that he hasn't had the close relationship that he had with his brother before his parents' death, and resolves to change that, to spend as much time as he can with his brother before the end, and to be there for him as a big brother. And this book follows that journey as Alex and Isaiah work on their relationship together and reveal their powers to each other and work through the meaning of the powers they have and how this ties into their family history, to their ancestors who were brought to America as slaves. And this book just broke me. It explores so many really serious issues like generational trauma and racial profiling. It talks about how well-meaning white people can love specific Black people, but still perpetrate harm and violence and even be the harbingers of death to the very same Black people that they profess to love, or other Black people who they don't have a personal connection with and therefore feel no loyalty towards. And I think that's really important to read for any of you watching this, and for myself as a white person, because it's so hard to come to terms with that fact that while there are people out there who are malicious, who are racist in an intentional way and actively hate people with different skin colors and different backgrounds than them, there are also people who feel that they have good intentions, who feel that they have love in their heart, who feel like they're doing the right thing, who are still perpetrating violence, who are still upholding white supremacy, who are still killing Black people, Black children, as we see in this book. And it's very painful to read. I would definitely recommend you look at the trigger warnings if you are considering reading this one. But I think it's really important. I found it very emotionally poignant. I found it devastating. And I also found it very thought-provoking, very meaningful. It was beautifully written and really jumped off the page for me, and I don't think I'm going to be forgetting this one for a very long time. The next book I finished in May was Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. And this is a romance between a fan fiction writer, a fan of a fantasy series that is very closely and obviously based on Game of Thrones, and one of the actors from the show. And the main character, April, is fat. And this book has gotten a lot of hype for being positive fat representation, for being body positive. And I was really excited to read it, not only because I loved Game of Thrones until the last season, and because I love fantasy and I'm an actor, so I thought that was cool that one of the main characters was an actor, and because I want to read more books that have positive fat representation, that have body positivity in general, no matter what size the characters are, and I heard that this was great for that. So I was really excited to read this. The blurb sounded amazing, and this one really let me down. It was not what I expected from it, and I feel like my issues are kind of twofold. On the one hand, I have issues with the story itself and the characters. So starting with April, who is our female lead, and she is fat, and she is supposed to be this body positive, great fat rep. And while I am really glad that there are many people who are reading this who felt that April was great representation and were really happy with how this book portrayed her and the way she feels about her body and the way she exists in her body in the world. And I am not fat, nor have I ever been, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. But I have had an eating disorder. I have dealt with body dysmorphia, and I am someone who is very much on the train of working towards body positivity, or at least body neutrality, of trying to find love for my body and to exist within it in a positive way, which is something that is very difficult to do when you've had an eating disorder. And I found that April spent a lot of time conflating everything anyone said or did with her weight. And at least in this book, it was almost always the case that the things that were being said or done by other characters had nothing to do with April's weight. So that was kind of frustrating to read because it really did feel like the story just kept coming to a halt with April misinterpreting what others were doing and assuming that what they were doing was because of her weight, and then not communicating those issues with other characters and just becoming angry and distant and disconnecting without any explanation. And some of these issues were actually issues that could have been prevented in the first place if she had communicated her boundaries and her expectations and her wants and needs, especially in the romantic relationship with Marcus. And she did not do that. And that's sort of the second part of this that I found really frustrating, was that it just felt like the two characters were much younger than they were supposed to be. April, I believe, was supposed to be around 37, and I think Marcus was supposed to be 40, and they were acting like they were 15-year-olds. It was kind of ridiculous how immature they were, especially in the way that they were handling communication or lack thereof. They really were not able to talk about their feelings or their intentions or their expectations. And as an adult in a serious relationship, though I am a decade younger than these characters are supposed to be, I just found it really frustrating to read, because if I'm reading a YA romance or a romance with 20-year-old characters, I might still be a little annoyed by miscommunication or lack of communication because it's annoying, but I can sort of give them the benefit of the doubt because they're young, you know? And I was awful at communicating with people I was dating when I was 17, so I don't know why I would expect other people to be great at it. But I would really hope that by the time you are around 40, that you've figured out how to talk to other human beings, especially other human beings you are having intimate relationships with. And it's really frustrating to read about characters who not only are not naturally good at it, because that's fine, it can be hard to have hard conversations, but also are just completely unwilling to try to work on it. So yeah, that was part 2. The other thing was that Marcus, on the other end, was constantly apologizing and over-apologizing and sort of groveling every time that April got upset about anything. He just completely prostrated himself and took all the blame. And I found that really frustrating because most of the time, there are exceptions, but most of the time, he hadn't done anything wrong. At most, he had misinterpreted what she'd wanted or not known what she'd wanted and done something that he thought would be good that she interpreted in a negative way. And he didn't deserve to be the one who had to kind of come groveling back to get her benevolent forgiveness when he hadn't done anything wrong. And I just kind of found that sad to read about. So obviously, I had some issues with the main characters and their relationship. It was really sad because I actually really liked both characters at the beginning of the book, and it felt like they had some really cute moments together near the beginning of the book, but things just really went downhill, and I just found myself cringing a lot more and just not really enjoying the romance or the characters. So that's my issue with the characters themselves and the relationship. But my other big issue with this book that really made me uncomfortable was the very thinly veiled inspiration of Game of Thrones. And it kind of sucks because this was sort of the thing that drew me in, that I was most excited about, was the idea of this romance being based on a world very similar to our own, where there is a hugely famous fantasy series like Game of Thrones. But I guess I thought it was going to be a different fantasy series, that it wasn't going to be so blatantly ripped off from Game of Thrones. And sure, the names are changed, but it's very obvious not only that it's Game of Thrones, but also who this actor is supposed to be. And for some reason, the fact that Marcus was so heavily inspired by a specific human being who is an actor was very unsettling to me. I just felt like Dade was crossing a line there by creating a character that was so heavily inspired by a real person who exists and could read this book, and writing this character into erotic scenes, into a romance. It just felt kind of icky and strange. And I'm not saying you can't write characters based on real life people, but the extent to which this character was clearly supposed to be a very specific person and the way that the character was written about just left me feeling really uncomfortable. So that's the other side of it. And it sucks because that's the thing that drew me in, that I was most excited about, but it just was not done at all in the way that I thought it was going to be. And it felt pretty inappropriate. And then there was the added factor that much of the book was spent as a mouthpiece for Dade to criticize the final season of Game of Thrones and the showrunners, which is totally relatable. I understand. I also hated season 8 of Game of Thrones, and I also blame the showrunners, but still felt kind of weird and inappropriate to write a book like this. You know, you could write an essay about it, start a podcast, tell your friends in group chat. I don't know. Anyway, so this book did not work for me, which is very sad because I was super excited for it. And I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read this book in the comments down below. Tell me why you loved it. If you loved it, if you agreed with me, let me know. I would like to feel like I'm not alone. I know most people really enjoyed it, and I don't want to deter you if you've been excited about this book because it worked for so many people, and I'm really happy about that. But if you are feeling a little unsure after what I've shared here, maybe take a second and think about it. Go check out some more reviews, especially if you are concerned about the fat rep. Check out reviews written by fat readers. I definitely saw several reviews from fat readers who were not happy with the fat rep, so it's definitely not a universal thing. But yeah, sadly, this one did not work for me. The next book I finished in May was The Infinity Quartz by Akemi Bowman. And this is another one that I was super excited to read because the premise is ridiculously amazing. So let me set the scene. This is a book featuring a biracial Asian protagonist, Nami, who dies and goes to the afterlife, where she discovers that the afterlife is not all roses and naked baby angels, but that it is in fact a war-torn dystopian land where the fictional version of Siri, the AI, has taken over the afterworld and enslaved the souls of the humans who exist there. And if that doesn't sound amazing to you, I don't know what to tell you, but it sounded incredible to me, and I was very excited to read it. And it was a total letdown, and it made me real mad. So right now, right here, I'm going to rant about it a little bit. If you don't want to hear a rant, feel free to skip to the next book. But my God, did this book let me down real hard. I will say that I had hope in the beginning. I liked the first 2 chapters, but after Nami's death, which happened right at the beginning there, things just plummeted downhill and never recovered. So I'm going to go through the things that bothered me about this book in a numbered list, because y'all know I like lists. So number 1, as I mentioned, I love me some world building, especially in sci-fi and fantasy. You just need the world building. It's not taking place in a world that we are familiar with. We need the world building to understand what's going on. This book had basically no world building. What I told you at the beginning is pretty much all you get, except for the fact that the afterlife is split into 4 courts, which you may have gathered from the title, but, you know, more information, and that the courts are ruled over by princes, who are basically the sons of this head AI, who is fictional Siri, and that all of the AI are kind of obsessed with being as human-like as possible while also trying to wipe out the human race. And that's it. That's all the world building you get. So, very frustrating. I did not feel like there was a sense of place. And that was kind of the thing I was most excited about, because it's the freaking afterlife. It could look like anything. It could feel like anything. It could smell like anything. It could be incredible. There is so much potential there. And it was just completely squandered. Nothing. No world building. Okay, so the second thing that really bothered me was the writing style. Good Lord. Okay, so I don't want to be mean to this author. I'm sure that they do amazing things. I'm sure they've written wonderful work, and I would like to try some of their other work in case I like it better than this book. But this book read like a teenager who just discovered similes and metaphors and was under the impression that inserting as many metaphors and similes as possible into every single paragraph made for good writing. So that was this book. Almost every single sentence had some sort of added in simile or was a metaphor, and it got so frustrating. And let me tell you, I love a simile. I love a metaphor. Give them to me. I love flowery language, but I do not love when every single sentence is injected with very basic similes and metaphors that oftentimes don't even really make sense, just to make it more interesting, I guess, than having a basic sentence that just tells you what's happening or how someone's feeling or what they're doing. And it was mind-numbing. No one feels heartache. Oh no, their heart has to crumble to ash. You can't just be hurt by someone saying something mean to you. You have to feel the sting of their words like tiny paper cuts all over your skin. It comes off incredibly melodramatic. I just couldn't stand it. Number 3, this book is so chock full of YA tropes. This could be a case study for pretty much every single YA fantasy trope that exists, including between the chosen one, insta-love, the gruff love interest who hates everybody but is super soft for MC catching the eye of a prince, the entire outcome of some sort of huge scale war resting on the shoulders of a teenage main character. It's all in there, and I hate it. And either these tropes are incredibly played out, which is what I would bet on, or maybe I'm just old and I should stop reading anything YA because I just can't suspend my disbelief anymore. Number 4, Nami is supposed to be 18 and she acts like she's 15. And it seems like that's not a big deal, but if you've ever been 15 and 18, you know there's a huge difference. And it's annoying. Now, there's nothing wrong with being 15, and I have no problem reading books that have 15-year-old protagonists, but when characters are supposed to be a certain age and they act way younger, it grates on my nerves. Just like spoiler alert, it's fine to have a romance between people who are in their teens or 20s, but don't make them 40 years old and then have them acting like they're 15. Number 5, this book is potentially the most repetitive book I've ever read in my life, and that seems like maybe an exaggeration, but I shit you not, this is probably the most repetitive book I've ever read. This main character thinks and says the exact same things every single chapter for the entire book. There are only 4 things that come up in her internal monologue, and they're worded essentially exactly the same every single time. And those are the fact that she is an older sister, the fact that she is interested in the gruff guy who doesn't like anybody, the fact that she is really feeling torn over whether or not AI deserves to live, and 4, what she's going to wear. That's it. She's literally in a dystopian afterlife that's been taken over by AI, and she's fighting for the existence and survival of humankind in the afterlife after being murdered at 18. And that's it. Those are the only things she thinks about. If it sounds mind-numbing to you, you're right. I think the most blatant example of this is the way that she thought about her sister constantly. And there was nothing wrong with thinking about your sister. I understand what the author was trying to do with constantly bringing back her younger sister and trying to have that as Nami's moral center, or, you know, her driving force for doing good in the afterlife was for the benefit of her younger sister. And that's great. That's fine. I love that. What I don't love is the fact that Nami repeated exactly the same phrase, which, if you'll allow me to paraphrase, was, "Is this what's waiting for May? For my family?" every 5 seconds through the entire book. I would recommend you make a drinking game out of it and take a shot every time she says that exact phrase throughout the book, except depending on how quickly you read, you may die. There are more things that I disliked about this book, shockingly enough, so you can check out my Goodreads review if you want even more of this rant. The last one I'll include, just because it really was the one that got to me the most, it just seems so ridiculous, was the fact that Nami does not seem to understand the concept of developing new relationships. She was constantly having this argument in her own head about whether or not it was okay for her to care about the humans that were around her in the afterlife. She was constantly sitting around like, you know, these people, they've given me a home. They've taught me everything about this world. They're constantly supporting me and helping me and encouraging me, but they're not my family. So like, can I care about them? Is that okay? And I'm sitting there yelling at the book like, Nami, have you never heard of a freaking friend? Like, what do you mean they're not my family? Can I care about them? You can have relationships that are not with your family. You can care about people who aren't your family. How is this a new concept for an 18-year-old? I don't understand. Deep breaths. So I'm going to stop now because I just can't. My blood pressure can't take me continuing. There are further points in my Goodreads review if you want to read them. But all I will say is that this book was a total letdown. The only things I liked about it were the concept and kind of the twist. I didn't really like the twist. It was mildly interesting. I preferred the twist to what was happening before I knew the twist, but I still didn't really like what happened after the twist. Anyway, those are basically the only things I liked about it. And now I'm just really sad/mad that this amazing concept got this treatment. So that was the Infinity Quartz. Would not recommend unless you feel like being irrationally angry for an excessive amount of time. Obviously, there were lots of people who liked this book. And if you liked it, I'm so happy for you. I wish I could have loved it, and really no judgment on you. Everyone likes different things, but I just could not. I could not take it. It was too much. Maybe I'm just too old for YA. Is that what's happening? Am I too old for YA? I'm about to turn 29. I just need to be done. That might be it. I might be too old. On a much happier note, the next book I finished in May was Inside Out and Back Again by Thanhha. So this book is very similar to Other Words for Home, and it focuses on the immigrant experience for a family from Vietnam who are escaping Vietnam as refugees to America. And this book also focuses on a young girl protagonist. In this case, it's Ha, and she is, again, a really complex, three-dimensional, fully developed character. And I just loved spending time with her. She was so plucky and stubborn and funny and caring and intelligent. And I just really enjoyed reading her story, which was heavily based on the author's experience of coming to America as a refugee from Vietnam. Again, like Other Words for Home, I just think it's such an important story for children and adults alike to explore the issue of how refugees and immigrants are treated in the new countries that they call home, the xenophobia and racism and bullying and harassment that they face. It is very poignant, very emotional, and just very much worth your time. I will definitely be recommending both Inside Out and Back Again and Other Words for Home to all of my friends who are parents to read to their children when they get to be an age where they can understand the concepts. And I would highly recommend them to all of you, whether you're an adult, if you have children who may benefit from these stories. I just think they're incredibly important, and they were both so moving. The next book I finished in May was Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. And this is a YA romance between Zainab, who is an Asian American Muslim, and Alex, who is an Asian Canadian Muslim, falling in love in Qatar over spring break. And I really enjoyed this one. I found it very eye-opening to the Muslim experience. And I appreciated that the two main characters, while they were both Muslim, had very different experiences of Islam and of coming to Islam. Alex converted at age 11 with his father and sister, whereas Zainab was born into a Muslim family and has always been Muslim. I also appreciated the differentiation between the experiences of Alex as a Muslim man who is also mixed race and not necessarily read to be Muslim from his appearance alone, versus Zainab, who is a hijabi and experiences that very blatant Islamophobia on a regular basis, especially in her experiences at school. I found their love story very cute and appreciated both of their characters. I also really loved the secondary characters. I thought all of the secondary characters, other than the obvious villain, to be really sweet and caring and lovely, especially the taxi driver. If you've read this book, you know who I'm talking about. What an angel. I just thought this one was really cute. I enjoyed it. I found it very informative, and I would definitely recommend. The next book I finished in May was The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. This is a fantasy novella where Chi, a non-binary cleric, and their talking bird companion, almost brilliant, travel to Thriving Fortune, the house on a glowing lake where the Empress of Salt and Fortune spent her years in exile, to see what they can find and record for posterity. And when they arrive, they come across an old woman named Rabbit, who has a lot to tell them about the Empress, probably more than they bargained for. I just thought that this was a really incredible novella. I will say that if you're considering reading this one, I would highly recommend you read it as an ebook or a physical book for your first time. I listened to it as an audiobook first, and I finished it and just felt like I hadn't understood what happened. You know, I got the basic plot. I felt like I had a feel for who the characters were, but it felt like I was missing something. So I decided to get the ebook and read it with my eyeballs, and everything clicked just immediately in a completely different way. It felt so much more meaningful. I felt so much more connected to the characters and to the story. I felt like I was picking up so much more hidden and deeper meanings than I did listening to the audiobook. So I would definitely recommend, even if you're someone who really enjoys audiobooks and feels like you get a lot out of them, and I am that kind of person. I've listened to audiobooks since I was a very young child, and I tend to be able to fully immerse myself in a story through an audiobook and still get the whole picture. This book is not one that I would say is a good audio first listen. If you're able, of course, if you are only able to listen to the audiobook, I would definitely recommend listening in short bursts and really focusing on what's being said and going back and listening again if you feel like you've missed something, to really absorb what's happening. But anyway, all of that to say, I adored this. I felt like this was such an empowering story. And even though it's so short, it really felt like it contained multitudes. This novella is at its core the story of women who have been brushed aside, gathering their strength and making their mark on history. One drunken evening, many years on, Nghi would say that the war was won by silenced and nameless women, and it would be hard to argue with her. I loved the world building here. I loved the world itself. I thought Nghi did such a great job of making a world that feels rooted in reality while also being so deeply magical. I loved the characters, Chi and Almost Brilliant and Rabbit and the Empress and so many of the other secondary characters, even characters who were maybe mentioned in a single chapter, just really came to life, really jumped off the page and felt so complex and complete. And I cared about them all so deeply. I loved the romance in this novel. There was a lot of depth and caring and laughter and chemistry, and it's really not the focus of the story, but those little blips of intimacy really tied all of the characters together and really brought the emotional core of the story home. I loved the message of female strength, of feminism and resilience that the story continued to repeat throughout. The quote that I think comes up for a lot of people when they think about this book and is just so perfectly done. It's just such a wonderful example of how this book is written and how masterfully it is written is this one. Angry mothers raise daughters fierce enough to fight wolves. I just love that so much. I think that is so perfect in general, as an idea, as a concept, as a phrase, as a call to arms, but it's also just such a beautiful way to sum up what this book is trying to do, and I adored it. Highly, highly recommend, and I cannot wait to read the next book in the series. Okay, and the last book I read in May was The Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George, and this was our book club pick for May. So this book, sadly, was not a hit for me. We picked it because we wanted to have something that was very light and comforting and a bit of a respite from the world and all of our personal stuff that all of us are going through and everything the world's going through and some heavier books that we've all been reading lately. We just wanted that comfort read that you can finish and just sigh and feel refreshed. And sadly, this one just didn't really do that for me. Part of that could be just where I'm at mentally. I'm very scattered. I'm very overwhelmed. I'm kind of going at a fast pace right now in life, trying to get my life in gear. And this was not a book that I was in the correct mental or emotional place to meet it where it's at. But I did also just have some gripes with the way that the book treated women in general. It definitely felt pretty misogynistic at several points. Even though it was written by a woman, all of the main characters and the point of view character are all men, and they spend most of the book talking about women. And the way they talk about women rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't blatant misogyny, it just had that undertone. And then it was sort of sandwiched with putting women on a pedestal like they're pure, perfect angels who can do no wrong, which is just something that frustrates me so much because it really strips women of their humanity, turning them into a two-dimensional concept, into an ideal, instead of allowing them to be the complex, messy, flawed human beings that women are. I think this idea that women are pure and perfect and must be protected and much better than men, too complex to be understood, too intelligent and powerful to be contained. It's just a weird narrative. It makes me uncomfortable. And I don't like the feeling of othering that's there. I just want equality, I just want women and men and non-binary people and gender fluid people and people of all gender identities to just be equal human beings who can be met where they're at as human beings and seen for their complexity and their wholeness as a person, and not be held up to some impossible standard or reduced to a stereotype or an archetype. It's just tiring. So that was my biggest problem with this. I just didn't really connect to it. I found the pacing pretty slow. I didn't feel pulled into the story. So This one I gave 2 stars. I just felt sort of meh about it. I didn't absolutely despise it. So those are all the books I finished in May. I am in the midst of reading several other books, probably too many books to be reading at once, but my life is all over the place, and there are several books that I started and didn't have a chance to finish before they went back to the library, or I just wasn't in the right headspace to read them, and I really wanted to save them for a time when I could actually sit down and appreciate them for what they are. So things are kind of up in the air right now. And as for my plans for June, I don't know how much I'm going to read because I'm moving across the country in a couple weeks and I don't really have time to read, to be honest. I'm sure my husband and I will listen to audiobooks as we're packing and when we're making the cross-country drive, but will we finish any of them? I don't know. So I'm trying not to set any expectations. I'm 9 books ahead on my goal. So if I don't finish any books in June, I will still be on track for my end of year goal, which is great. I am hoping to read at least a little bit because it is Pride Month and I would love to read as many books as possible written by and for and about LGBTQIA+ people. I want to support my community. So that is something I would really love to do. And I have several books kind of ready to go that I think I should be able to finish, especially some of the lighter, fluffier books that I think are just a little easier for my brain right now to handle. So we'll see how it goes. No expectations. I may come here at the start of July and say, hey, I read 0 books. Okay, bye. But maybe not. Maybe I'll read 10. Maybe I'll read 20. Could happen. Probably not. Probably won't happen, but it could. So that's it. That's this video. It's late. I'm tired. I'm losing my voice. So I'm going to go. I hope you enjoyed it. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And let me know in the comments down below a book that you think I should read and also the best book that you read in the last couple months. I want to know. Thank you so much to my patrons for their support. Extra special thanks to our newest patrons, Pam, Jasmine, and Melissa. Welcome all of you to the squad. We are so excited to have you. If you at home want to join the squad, feel free. There's a link in the card and in the description box down below. There is no book club pick for June because moving, but we will resume in July. So you can feel free to join now if you'd like, or you can wait till July if you want to join the book club. Just letting you know. And that's it. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends. P.S. My next video is my new bullet journal setup for the second half of 2021. So get excited, turn on the notifications so you don't miss it. I'm super excited about it. It turned out so well, and I may or may not be using one of the notebooks from my upcoming Art Journal of collab, which is launching at the end of June, that I've been working on for a year. So you may get an early sneak peek before anyone else is getting sneak peeks. And by sneak peek, I mean seeing the entire cover of the notebook that I designed. So don't miss it. Okay, bye.